Good afternoon. Welcome, adventurers. That's what I'm trying to say. We're running a little bit late today because the world is running a little bit late. But, it's Eastern Daylight Time instead of Eastern Standard Time. So we actually have another hour before we get things done. Yes, who's ready to dance? Two Turtle Time, I am. Bill is. Let's turn on the music and start dancing.
The volume seems so low.
All right, that's enough of that. Next week, that'll be part of an intro video, which Bill has already previewed minutes ago. So it's here, it's alive. We've got the new logo coming. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. And here's Jon Hill.
Nice.
Hey, guys.
Sounds like there's going to be like an increase in quality around here.
Hey, we don't see his picture, though, man. What do you...
Well, I'm walking to the place where I'm going to actually turn the video on.
You can just listen in and we can chat about you and say bad things and you can say something in a disagreement, but not show us your face. I don't know. All right. I already said
Alien World's Anonymous.
The Reptile Reporter Show scheduled live show. It is Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time, which I'm opposed to, but we won't go into that anymore today. Bill Strand, the headmaster of the Chameleon Academy, is here. Jon Hill is here, only in voice, but we'll see him. We'll see him on video sometime soon.
We only had the budget for voice.
We are chatting about the ethics of reptile sales. I don't know if we're going to be able to drag everybody in and do everything we need to do, but hey, James Cross is here. Two Turtle Tom has been here. Inspector Gadget is
That's
here.
Howard. Howard from Florida.
Howard, yes. Let's see, back to the script, huh? But first, Bill, any announcements?
Other than I'm going forward with developing, you know what? No, everything's up in the air. I'm juggling everything. I have no announcements. I'm just trying to survive this.
Yes, your Panther project. I don't want to hear the announcements because and John's here now, so he might be opposed. So we have to let him get. All right.
I think he'll actually support the latest development.
From iPar Dallas is here. Welcome, John.
Hey, guys.
Any announcements today?
Announcements?
Yes. Anything that you're working on? Anything's going on? I see you've got several really cool chameleons available. So check out his website, please, because his chameleons are awesome. I have 3 of them. And they are just doing incredible. They're growing huge. They're bigger than anything I've ever been able to produce, and even bigger than some of the wild caughts I have. So
cool.
They're doing very well. So anyways, all right. So last thing to announce: the grand opening is next week. I know we've already been on. I forgot to check when we started this, but we've got a grand opening. We're gonna have a new logo. We're gonna have a new theme. We're gonna use a theme song in a video. We've got all kinds of stuff planned. Merchandise. There's going to be merchandise on the merch store.
Sure.
Find it for the chameleon, or not my McZoo logo, McZoo Exotics logo. You can find merch. There'll be a podcast. At least got one episode that's done, and I got a couple recorded, and much more. So now back to the show because we just got to let people think about it for another week. So apparently somebody told me I should just have this big whole relaunch since I've got a new logo and a video and all that stuff. I won't tell you who the person was.
Crazy
talk. But his initials are BS. I don't know what that means. Boy, I'm starting out off the gate real hard.
Wow, you're just on fire here. How are you going to keep this up for the entire show?
I don't know. Yesterday, I went and did my regular screening stuff. I had last night was good night's sleep, but the night before I was preparing for a colonoscopy, which I had my colon exam and I didn't do the colonoscopy. If it'd be confused, so I was prepping for that, and that was a long night. So I don't know if I'm still exhausted or what have you, but that's where I'm at. But if you're over 50 or you've got risk of cancer of colon and you're under 50, actually it's at 45 now, get your colon screened because it's important, because you don't want to die of a preventable disease. All right,
You know what? This is you get all sorts of benefits. You come to this show.
Yes, exactly.
Health checks.
I'm getting close.
This is
I'm
like
getting
a
close.
one-stop shop.
Yeah, and you know what? They also have a test where you can test your stool if you don't have any risk of stool cancer, which is really cool because you don't have to go through the whole prep and everything. You do have to prepare a lot. My wife did it because she's got no family history and nothing to do, so hers was a lot easier than my last night. But anyways,
Jonathan, I think we just sit back and let Sean go.
Yeah,
showing no signs of stopping.
With John, but because we're gonna have a meaty topic here today, but nonetheless, let's get back to the show. Reptile sales ethics. All right, so we're talking here all species, but the love here is the chameleons. 2 out of the 3 people here are really heavily chameleon guys, and the next one is a little bit heavily into chameleons, but has a couple others. So, and I know, John, that you do breed some snakes, and Bill, you have some other oddities.
Some don't breed anything else.
The reptiles, but
I'm just chameleon.
So be it. Okay, so let's talk. What about the ethics of sales? Mostly we're talking about shows, but we talk about the Reptile Show Reporter talking about shows and zoos and places you would go and places you'd see reptiles, places that you purchase them, all kinds of different things. So we could talk about sales in general, even online sales, things that are like a virtual store. We can talk about that. So let's start off with wild caught.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking we have three ethical concerns here. Number one, the concern for the animal and taking care of the animal. Number two, the concern for the customer, and then the ethics as how your actions affect the reptile community. And so I'd say we have those 3 levels. And it's interesting when we start bringing in a reptile show, because all of a sudden now you don't have your home base. You now have to make everything portable and set up within hours. And so the question there is, how are you taking care of the animal while it's at the show? How are you taking care of the customer? Everybody wants to sell everything they got, but how are you doing that? And then how does your table reflect on the reptile community? Because say we got people who just don't like us going through those shows, what are they going to think when they see whatever you've got?
Now, wait a minute, Bill. Are there really people who don't like us?
Well,
you mean the reptile community as a whole?
Well, I mean, I've heard there are people who don't like you. I think I'm universally loved.
Yes, that's why you get all that hate mail. It's universal love.
It's just another form of love. That's the way I take it.
All right. John, input, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Bill just said. I think that's a good way to frame the question. The animal, the customer, and the community, as far as like the different levels of consideration that we should have. I think if you were to say it's primarily the animal, the animal is going to be your primary concern if you're going to weight them, and then customer, and then how it affects the community more broadly, I'd say is if I was going to give them a weight of which one's the most important. And I think the community is important too, but it's a little bit more amorphous. It's not as easy to measure. It's not as easy to control. And so I like the idea that you have primary responsibility for the animal, secondary and tertiary for the community.
And I would say if you're taking care of the animal, the other 2 start falling in line. If we are showing the animal off in a way that's responsible for the animal, number one, to the customer, they see how the animal should be cared for. And how you do the sale is another aspect to that. But when you show how the animal should be cared for, as opposed to sitting there in a deli cup, that it may be effective and cheap, but it doesn't It's not helpful, and probably not good for the animal. And then as far as the community, if someone walks through that show and they see a number of nicely made up cages, it's a lot harder to take a picture and say, look at how horrible this is. It's a meat market.
Exactly. Yeah. If it looks beautiful when they take the picture, then
it's like, I don't want to print this. It doesn't serve my goals. When it looks beautiful and people are going to look at that and say, wow, I like that.
That's pretty cool. I want to see what's there.
Now,
All right.
Jonathan, how much did you go to shows?
Here as well. Just want to make sure we announce that. We talked about Two Turtle Tom and Howard and James Cross and a whole bunch of other people are here. So just want to announce it because the show, and we appreciate people being with it. So, okay, go on. I apologize for interrupting.
So, Jonathan, do you actually go to shows to Venn?
I used to go to about a dozen a year. It's been a little while since the pandemic. Pandemic and young children came at the same time in my life, and so I haven't restarted doing shows. But before that, I used to do about a dozen a year.
Okay.
So,
and do you have how did you set that up for your chameleons?
I mean, I've done it a couple of different ways. The first couple of shows I did when I just started out, I was at that time was still doing like bio bin raising. So this is back in the very beginning, and I actually took the bins to the tables and had fully planted bins, and then I would have 2 or 3 juveniles per bin, and then that was my table. Then as I got better at it, and as I shifted to trying to get them individually raised from the very beginning, I started to bring Reptile smalls that were planted, and had those planted with a UVB bar and an LED strip, the correct plants, everything right there on my table, so that when people came by, they'd often have trouble finding them, and they'd think I'm selling the plants in the cage, and then I'm like, no, there's chameleons in there. He's over here, and so that's where that last show that I went to, that's the type of thing that I did, and I liked that exchange because it promoted a longer conversation, because the only way that they were going to know what you were selling is if they asked, and then and then you'd have to tell them where it is, and then you get into, because of that, you're interacting with everybody who could potentially be buying from you. The other flip side was I had like the old timers that would be on like either side of me, and they'd be like, no one's ever going to buy anything from you because they can't see what you're selling. And most of the time, it's like a really nice guy who specialized in hognose, and another guy that did inverts, and you know, they they have different considerations than we do as chameleon breeders. And so there's sometimes when you get into expos, you get into that mentality of like, people need to be able to see it. It's got to be visible, and so there's a lot of that as the primary concern. But for us as chameleon breeders, I always felt like we need to teach people a little bit at the point of sale. And so I felt like doing it that way promoted that type of exchange.
All right.
So we got a question. How do you sell panther chameleons at shows where the buyer may be making a compulsive sake decision, I think he was trying to say, and does not
have
an
enclosure set up at home? Yeah, I mean, in that situation, you talk to them about the caging requirements, and if they don't have the cage set up, then they don't take the animal home with them. Sometimes what I've done is you just mark the animal sold. They buy the animal, they go home, they get the cage set up, and then you get them the animal later. But you just say, okay, I'll hold on to them while you get your cage set up, and do it that way. And I know other chameleon breeders in this area do that pretty frequently, so it's not like you're the only one doing that, which could result in someone saying, who's that impulsive, but also going to shift and just go get a chameleon from somebody else because they're not forcing them to get the enclosure set up. around here, I know at least Brandon, Barbara, and Jennifer, they all would do the same thing. So there's kind of a tight knit group of chameleon breeders that would be at these shows, and we kind of know what we'll say in that type of situation, what we'll do. So we're not going to compete on that. We're not going to be like, oh, Barbara said you have to get your enclosure set up. Here's a chameleon. Like nobody over here
Here,
would do
take
that.
two.
Yeah, here, take two. No, and no one's competing on that. Everyone kind of agrees that's the right way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, I found that I actually sold more plants at the shows than I actually sold chameleons, because people would like my plants and they'd see the plants, and I'd like, I can't, you can come back at the end of the show and take the plant. But I actually brought in extra plants the second show I went to, because I sold all my plants, and I not out from under the chameleons, but I sold all my plants because they were just sitting in cages with the chameleons, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna have more plants to sell and take them out and switch them out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen Brandon do that over the years. Now he has a lot more dry goods and plants and a lot of things on his table. He's doing a really good job, essentially diversifying, because he noticed that was something that people needed. So,
all right.
Well, that's that. It kind of goes into the next stage of the customer, where we start talking about how do you vet the customers. I know there's people on there that'll sell to anybody, but doesn't talking to a person a long time and then telling them no, doesn't that put you in a poor competitive position?
it depends. I think it depends, right? Because it depends on what you're saying no about. Like, if you're saying no about something like that is more debatable. So, for example, if you're going to be a stickler about them having a fog hydration strategy versus Mist King and some other stuff, and that's what you're going to, say that's your no, then I feel like that's where you might be at a competitive disadvantage. But if what you're doing is you actually can see that, hey, this isn't a safe environment to be sending that animal into, and you've made that conclusion from your conversation with them, then I think that's not very common, and you're not going to be at too much of a competitive disadvantage by saying no to that person, because there's not too many of those people out there. I could name them on one hand, there, because usually when you have a long conversation with somebody, you can get them to a point where you feel comfortable, after educating them. If you can see that their attitude is still just kind of flippant and they're not listening to what you're saying. I haven't actually had that happen to me, but I don't know if anybody else has had that type of experience where you try to educate somebody and then at the end of the day you feel like they're just not budging. They're not listening to anything you're saying.
I have.
Oh yeah.
I've come out and have said, yeah, I really don't think a chameleon's right for you. and I let them get mad at me and they walk away. That's okay. You have punished me by not buying my chameleon. Excellent. We have an accord.
Good.
I think
I'm
I
glad
have an advantage in that sense, because when I go there, I know I have a primary job. This isn't my income. This has nothing to do with putting money on the. If I walk out of there with a sale, it's worth pays for more than the table and the whole time. And so I don't care. I'm not going to send a chameleon to a place where it's going to just die, because I raise limited numbers and I do a good job as best as I can. And I for a while, specifically like quadricornis and other stuff that I had very little of and nobody has. You couldn't get one of those pry one out of my hands. It was like pry it out of my dead hands, because even then I'd be holding on too tight. But I did sell a few to some people, but which I somewhat regret because I don't have them all back. but you get to a point where you can't keep them all. But I don't have to sell, because I never have a clutch that I've incubated and let go and grow them out, then I'm not willing to keep the whole thing until they die. And so it's just how big my place is and how big I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not overburdened by that. So that I have an advantage, and that's not fair because not everybody goes to a reptile shows like that. This is some people's livelihood. It's like I was doing a podcast video with someone who sells geckos, and she was talking about her livelihood and trying to get her husband to come and be able to not work anymore. And so it's just that type of thing. But they're doing a very good job with their geckos, and they're doing awesome. And I've got all my geckos from her because the reptiles of Eden is what I'm talking about. They do an excellent job and everything's great. And it's I would do those over anyone else, even if I paid 5 times as much, because I know that there's a good, healthy gecko and what have you. So it could be that way. But I think that, you're at a disadvantage in some ways, but at the same token, I feel it's the way I need to do things. And if I do things, then maybe someone else at the show will step up, because, the Ohio shows aren't, they're more than 50% flippers, people who buy stuff and flip it and just trying to get people to buy stuff. And they don't care if they have something. They don't even talk to them about the care, or they didn't even know about the care. You start talking to them about the care, or you talk to them about when was this one hatched, or how old is this one, and they just give you this rough idea of, oh, I bought it from some friend of mine and in some area that and you're like, no, you don't know even the hatch month. No, we're stop talking. This conversation ends here. It may not, if it's a New Caledonia gecko, it's not wild caught because unless it's illegal. But it's still one of those things where I'm like, you don't know what you're selling, and you just bought this in a bunch, and I'd be better going to the local store and picking something out of the display when no one knows anything about what's going on. So yeah. But okay, anyways, Bill, your first say call these pillars, since that's a favorite word of yours and not one of mine. But anyways, pillars. The first pillar is the people, the pets,
the chameleon, the animal,
the animal. Then it's the attendee, the person purchasing, and then it's the community as a whole. I mean, these are sounding very much like the 4 things that we look at here. We look at the animals, the vendors, the show itself, and the attendees as the different topics on this whole show, as we kind of warm this show down to where it needs to be. But okay, so let's go to talk about the attendees who are potential purchasers.
And to say overall, I know people are going to be listening and they're going to say, wow, this sounds great, except I'm going to be doing all of this. This is extra cost. It is burdening me with more that I have to set up, bring, and the sales are not going to be going as quickly because you're talking to people. And so this is putting me at a disadvantage to the person right next to me who has a whole table full of deli cups and wild caught animals from all over the place. And so I think this is also a conversation to be had with the show promoters and the producers of the show, because they're the ones who are going to have to say, all right, there's going to be minimum standards at this show. And I think that's just as critical as us as vendors saying we are going to hold a higher standard.
Yeah, because I've definitely been at shows where it's the chameleon breeders who I would say are actual breeders. And then you've got your flippers and people that are just offloading tons of animals. And often what happens, and often those are a lot cheaper and in poor shape. And then those same people will go grab that off the table and then talk to the chameleon breeder, because the chameleon breeder knows about chameleons.
Yeah.
This other person who they got it from doesn't know can't answer their questions. So they buy it from them, come talk to you. And that's a pretty, that happens a lot.
Yes. Yes.
So if you are a chameleon aspiring to have chameleon breeding be your career, then you are going to be in a really tough spot, because you're going to spend your time competing with that.
When I
guess
would be at shows and I would be selling cages through Dragon Strand, I'd have people come up with their chameleon in one hand, their Reptibreeze in the other hand, and they say, "What else do I need?" And it's like, okay, you really, and it's very painful because, of course, I'm an educator, and so I want to help. That's kind of like my other job. But
Yeah.
yeah, when you call me on the Dragon Strand phone and you start talking about the Reptibreeze that you want to set up,
Yeah.
and the chameleon asking me, it's like, okay, this is the wrong forum. Do this on Instagram where I just look at it and decide if I'm going to respond.
I think one thing that I noticed though was, especially with chameleons, and it's probably because of the area I was in and where the show was at, there were chameleon people who were flipping terrible shaped wild caughts, and the people would come to me, they'd talk to me about it, and they'd actually have the wild caughts already, and I told them don't put them on my table because these are potential vectors of disease. You've got a wild caught here. I don't think if they ever actually told you what that means, it's so
Yeah.
big, there's no way they kept it. But I gave out my card. I talked to him for a long time, and I got sales because those wild cuts went home and died. And it's terrible. I mean, but
Yeah.
that we're going to die anyways. It's neither here
Yeah.
nor it wasn't like it was the care. It was they were already on their way out the door, and so I actually turned those into sales later on of
Yep.
chameleons who did well and who people who continue to contact me about how great their chameleon's doing and what have you from years ago.
Yeah.
That's what I was that's how I kind of took the thing. Although at the same token, once we got going on this kind of stuff, being at the show was, I don't know, I enjoyed being at the show and walking around looking at stuff and talking to people
Yeah.
more than I did selling stuff, because I sold a whole lot more online, and I could like sell 3 at home online and
While you're at the show.
right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, wait a minute, I don't even have a great website. All I have is my breeders on the website. I don't even have a place to buy them. But there's people, contacting me, buying them off the website or off just connections, and I'm there sitting there selling, wasting my time. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It was fun being there and being part of that, being a vendor, and that's what I kind of was a goal for me. But after 10 months of doing that, I actually paid for 12 because I told the guy I'd do it for a year. That way I could get in. But it wasn't as much fun. It was great coming home with more money than I left with, which was a very strange thing, having gone there for 20 years and had it been the other way. But there were a few weeks where it wasn't. It was I spent that money anyways on the way out the door. But
Yeah.
it really it's a challenge. How do you choose how many to bring? I guess that's what I just brought a few. I brought a few that I could display correctly. I think I had 2 rows of cages that I made them myself that fit chameleons. They were like a small Reptibreeze or a medium Reptibreeze
Yeah.
size, somewhere between those 2 sizes. And I built them myself. They were very heavy. I don't know why. I mean, I build things very heavy, but because it's sturdy, and I wanted to be able to take it back and forth. But I only brought a limited number. And people are like, "Where are all the rest of them?" I'm like, "Well, Jackson chameleon's a Jackson chameleon. They all kind of look a little bit alike. If you're talking about panthers, maybe we've got a few different kinds of panthers and they look different. But as Jacksons and Hanellis, and they were all kind of the same. But this is my sample one. I can sell you the other ones, but I don't know. I'm off topic a little bit, but
But as far as how many, it depends on how many cages you can fit on your table. I've got a setup that I use where I can get 8 smalls, 2 rows of 4 on one table, um, with lights and everything. So usually 8 is my max, and I've never been at a show that's large enough where I'm going to sell 8. So, um, I mean, most of the shows around here, even like Repticon, I went up to White Plains in New York City, um, and like Forest State Reptile Expo. There's one over in Northern Virginia, and a couple in Pennsylvania that I've gone to, like York, Pennsylvania, and things like that. But I've never been at a show where I was gonna sell out and have trouble with 8. Eight's plenty.
And Howard has something, and if you bring too many and you bring them back unsold back to your facility, it's possible you could be introducing parasites. Do you,
Yeah.
Ron, when you go back, do you re-quarantine your stuff for a period of time, or how do you deal with that?
That's a good question. I mean, I did not re-quarantine. So yeah, but
Well, if
I
you're
didn't.
keeping
I
them
also did.
separate anyways.
They're keeping them separate, and I didn't let anybody handle them for the most
Mhm.
part. So that I wasn't concerned about like if I had had an animal that was out and people were handling it, and they could have handled another animal, then yeah, that would be like cause for concern. But I actually don't usually let people hold my stuff. So
Yeah, I know that people love handling things, but when I had chameleons and I was selling them, I didn't. It was the rare exception that I ever let anybody hold it,
yep,
and that was that.
like
Holding
the
the
word
chameleon when you could see the chameleon,
you.
holding it was a filter for me to say,
Mhm.
if you're going to leave because you can't hold it, then you're probably not a chameleon person.
Exactly. Yeah, and even if I have had them out, it's usually on a stick. So like they're on a stick and someone is holding the stick. So there's some potential risk of contamination, but we're not talking about letting them crawl all over people or anything like that.
So, yeah, a stick was a good way
Mhm.
to demonstrate because of course the person wants to see it outside the cage and walking and make sure
Yeah.
there's no broken bones and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
inspecting the chameleon is certainly a
Fine.
valid thing to do.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that's a good question though, Sean. I think that if the way I would see it is it depends on how much exposure they're getting to the show and to the people at the show. And I tend to lean towards not much exposure at all. So
Yeah. We've talked with snake people on the show, and they take them home and put them in a quarantine because snake
yep.
people like to have their snakes held. And,
Yeah.
I know that where I bought my snakes from at the show, they stopped letting them be held as soon as I decided I was going to purchase them. But they were held beforehand, and I kept them in quarantine for 90 days,
Yeah.
away from everything else, which is a very big challenge in my house since I have so many rooms full of reptiles it's like, where do I put them where they're not going to be anywhere near anyone else?
Yeah.
But uh, but the but I quarantined all those, and I quarantined everything because I just know too much because
Mhm.
Bill keeps talking about all these parasites, and I was on a show with him talking, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go to the show in a biohazard suit and like go in with that and like
Canceled the show. You
you know
canceled the show visit.
right. But I didn't though. But I went and I just
Oh,
kept myself. I didn't touch anything so that I was worried about, or on the flippers or wild caught tables that you always know when the wild caught tables. That's not something that attendees as a whole have a great idea for, but once you've been to a few shows, you can kind of tell who's got what. And when they have tons and tons of stuff that you can't possibly grow and create in your own place, then unless they have some huge facility where they're breeding all the stuff and tons of people working with them, it's not a chance. So you just know who the wildcats are. But all right, okay. So
Howard's
we've
got another question there.
yeah. All right.
We could build up bring up that one.
Parents.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, I know. I keep talking a lot. I'll let you go first on this one.
I personally make sure that the parents are actually buying it for their child to see. If the
Yep.
parents are buying it and intend to take care of it, like any reptile, any pet that I get my children, it's the other way around. Any reptile I'm getting my children, I've only got one under 18 now. Any pet I'm getting them, even the older ones that are in college, I expect to take care of it. And anything they do is work off of me. So if I don't have a parent that feels that way, I'm not selling it.
Yeah.
That's the way it is, and maybe they're disappointed, but you know what? At some point, I think it's kind of like what was that movie, The Miracle on 35th Street, where the guy tells them where to go get something cheaper, and they come back and they say, "I'm going to shop at this store forever because of how kind you were to me." It's a little different because they're buying another reptile somewhere else, and maybe they're never going to be back. But I feel like if you treat people the way you'd like to be treated yourself, they'll be back, and if they're not back, then you're not doing yourself and the thing service. Yeah, Inspector
All right.
Gadget says wash hands. But I tell you what, that's true. But you wash the oils off your hands. You can damage your hands and cause more long-term stuff if you do that a lot. There's these balances, and so don't touch anything that you don't want to touch, and that you don't want to get things because
You mean
I know
like
too
the
much in
faucet
this
handle
area as
that
well.
you use to turn on the water?
Yeah, exactly. Or or using the pump for the Purell. Purell is alcohol. It it kills everything. It kills your natural flora on your hands as well as what have you. But
He was applauding. There was supposed to be a clapping hand emoji.
yeah, I hear you. I'll believe that when I see it. Okay.
All right. Well, so Sean, what do you do when a kid comes up to your table with a wad of cash?
I say no. I say bring your parent. But that's me. I'm in a great position. This is where I spend my money. This is me just playing around, having fun, learning stuff, and this is my enjoyment. This is my
Yeah.
extra life.
Sean McSue, crusher of dreams. Yeah. Yeah.
No, this is the dream. This is the dream thing that you have. But you have to be able to stop and say, is this right? And can you sleep at night? That's
Yeah.
some people can sleep at night and do anything.
There's yeah. But I think though, when a kid comes up, you say, where's your parents, right? Like the first thing is try to figure out who's the responsible party, and then you can talk to them. I've never had a kid that's like really young with a lot of cash and no parents. Maybe you guys have had that, but like
I haven't had it happen either. So.
Yeah.
Bill, you have it happen?
You can
Oh,
track
I've
down
had
the
it
parents.
happen. Yeah. Now they're not looking for a cage, which I'd have no problem giving to a kid.
Yeah. Well, you're in California. You guys are weird over there, I guess. That's
Yeah. Well, in our reptile shows, it's like all of a sudden there is a city that appears.
Yeah.
We have huge shows.
Exactly. Yeah. Big shows, but also people with money at the shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cost of living out there in California is so much greater. So I guess that's probably why people don't think that hundreds and hundreds of dollars in a kid's hands are a problem. Huh?
Yeah, it's not happening at our shows.
No, not at all. That's just those crazy Californians. We won't, Oh man, Bill, I'm in rare form tonight. I know that sometimes I get a little crazy, but
you can say what you want. I'm still living in California.
Yeah, I know. But you can't have a whole bunch of things like sugar.
I can't have a basement. That's the one
thing. Basement at the goose.
Yeah.
I got a whole bunch of stuff. Basement is so awesome. If you don't know what you're missing. And
I do know what I'm missing.
If you took your money you spent on your house, you could buy a palace with 10,000 square feet of animal shelters, and it would the monthly upkeep wouldn't be anything.
I'm just tonight I'm gonna go down to the beach and cry as I watch the sunset go down across under the waves, and I'll just cry a little bit.
I'll be in my reptile room as the light goes out, and I'll be enjoying being my basement, by the way, enjoying the lights going out down there. But okay, sure, whatever makes you happy. All right, we've got 2 out of 3. We've got the reptiles, we've got the people buying them. What about the community as a whole? And I don't mean the reptile community. I mean the greater community.
You know what, Sean? It's probably a good idea. It is probably good that I don't have a basement. I think that would be so dangerous for me to have access to that kind of space. Yeah, that would be trouble. But anyway, you were saying.
I was just saying, how about the community as a whole, the human population, however we're going to talk about it. And first, I think Two Turtle Tom has a question. Can you answer
this? And I think it probably has to do with earthquakes. I don't know if it has to do with earthquakes. It would seem like if we can build skyscrapers, we could certainly build a basement. But nope, no basements. Generally speaking, I don't know why. It seems like that
Florida
would
as a whole is the
be
same
great.
because they flood, because they're under the floodplain. So
Yeah, well,
it depends on,
that's Florida.
Yeah, well, hey, Florida's a nice place, but anyways, there's no basements there. They're all on slabs. So at least that's what I've experienced over time. But
I think there was a couple of places had basement type things up north when I was, but they were very old. I don't know why. I don't know why we don't have basements.
And I agree, too, total Tom. We have a Great Lake. I think, Jonathan, you've got a Great Lake out there too, don't you? Somewhere near you, or I guess not really near you.
Nah, not anymore. I
Not
grew up around a Great Lake, but I'm pretty far from them now, in Maryland. So.
And Howard says, "Good luck buying any earthquake insurance." He's in California as well, so I don't need earthquake insurance. I don't know if you need
No.
it. I don't even.
Howard's in Florida, and yes, I have to have earthquake insurance. Everybody has to. If you want to buy a house, you need earthquake insurance.
Yipes! I can't imagine that. I think I need snow insurance, but that's called a snow shovel and a person to come by when it gets too busy. All right. So, anyways, back to the topic at hand. We're getting off the topic. What about the whole community as a whole? What about people walking into the show who have an axe to grind, maybe, or people who don't have an axe to grind, but we might cause them to have an axe to grind? What do we think about that?
Well, I think what's even more dangerous is the people who know reptiles as a whole, and they understand that chameleons are already one of those species that are difficult to keep in captivity. So, if you run down the list of like reptiles that are on the cutting block, it's like reticulated pythons, tegus, and chameleons are on that list, right? So, and it's not because they're big or scary or dangerous. It's because they're hard to keep in captivity, and do it right. So when you have people doing it wrong, it it's like right at the edge. And when you have people that are not being ethical, it makes their argument even stronger for why we shouldn't keep chameleons in captivity. So like you hear you see the clickbait stuff on YouTube, like don't buy chameleons and you know all this stuff. There's a reality to that, which is people who understand reptiles as a whole already know that chameleons are challenging. And I know as someone who sells chameleons, it's like we might have a tendency to be like, oh, it's not that hard, you can do it, just because you got to sell something to you. But I think the reality is when you compare it to other reptiles, which I keep a number of them, they are way harder. There's no question about it. Like my pine snakes take very little effort, and they're rock solid. They're going to live 40 years, you know, pretty consistently. You're going to have to do something pretty bad for them to go south. They live in captivity pretty easily. Whereas chameleons, they're you can automate the enclosure. You can get it to a point where it's enjoyable, but it's always kind of at a knife's edge as far as like hey, has the mister you got to watch the misters and make sure that all the misters are working, because if your mister stops working for a week, then that's going to be a real problem for you, especially if you're relying on that for hydration. Like run down the list of all the things that we as chameleon keepers have to do to make sure that our chameleons are okay in captivity. I feel like we just have to recognize that the flip side of that is the community as a whole. All of herpetology might say, "Hey, you guys are the problem." Like, and this is not even like external to us. This is not like someone who has an axe to grind. This is knowledgeable people who understand the challenges of keeping chameleons in captivity, that we have to keep on our side. And I feel like that's something that we have a responsibility to do, is to talk to that person and explain to them why we're doing it ethically, why our customers are having success, and have a good answer for them as to like why we should be able to keep them in captivity.
I think the important thing though is the big thing is if people come in and your setups aren't nice and you don't have enough space for them and you're putting them in little deli cups, people don't even talk to you about it. You know, it's the people who come in and go, "Wow, look at that almost dead chameleon," and that's why we shouldn't have these things. I think that I think is challenging. I think it's what causes all these problems. It's what causes the Lacey Act to keep coming up. It's up
Yep.
again.
Yep.
It
Yep.
was introduced by somebody that I didn't think would be the person introducing, but it was probably the guy who introduced it the first time, and someone out of Louisiana who introduced it the first time. I actually know him. I met him. I don't know him, but I have some mutual friends, and he was a great guy. He's a physician. He knows his stuff. He was very, but he introduced this act without thought. I mean, I think I thought he listened to one side and the argument was good, and we hurt ourselves when we don't do things well,
Yeah.
when we don't do things great, and I'm going to reptile show to reptile show. I think I've been to 10 different ones in the last year or two. There's a lot of people doing it poorly, or at least just passing, keeping them alive, but they're not really something I put in put in the front page of the newspaper and say this is the way I like to do my reptile shows. So that's a big question mark to me.
And I'm interested when you bring on show promoters at how responsive they will be. I know that there are show promoters that I've talked to that are responsive, but they've got to make decisions too because it's a direct hit to their pocketbook. The more strict they are.
Unfortunately, the show promoters that I've been talking to that are kind of like an off-camera kind of person, they don't want to be because they don't want to have to, talk because there's stuff
Yeah.
that they do that is.
I feel like the show that you have to worry about is the show that's like just barely meeting its budget, right? Because they're less likely to tell one of their vendors, especially if it's one of the larger vendors, like, no, you can't come because they could be underwater with that. Like they could be in a difficult situation. Whereas when you're talking about some of the larger shows where like to fill those tables, they could make they could say one thing online, open it up, they'd fill the tables in a day,
Mhm.
right? Those shows are at very little risk of losing money because they can fill the tables. They're not they're fine. They as long as they've got a good business plan for how to run the show, how to price the tables, like they're going to make money. They're not worried about that. Whereas some of the smaller shows, it is a more difficult thing for them to say to vendors like, no, you can't come here, or to put in rules that would exclude them. So I feel like the biggest opportunity we have is with some of those larger shows where they're going to fill those tables no matter what they do, and they have more liberty to actually set standards because their bottom line is going to get covered no matter what they do.
Now, John, am I correct that you've talked to show promoters about getting them to restrict the sale of eggs? Is that
Yeah.
correct? How does that conversation go?
Well, now it's a lot easier with the morph market position being public, and that's a precedent that we can point to. But when talking to them, most of the time they don't know much about the issue, right? Um, they already understand like hatchlings is not a good idea, and so sometimes it depends on who they've talked to first, right? If they talk to somebody, a vendor who sells eggs, and they've heard the whole sales pitch about eggs, then that person is harder to flip because they have a base argument to get them off of. But if somebody is totally new to the topic, then those people are usually a lot easier to talk to. You help educate them about it, and then also tell them what the egg sales pitch is, so that they're more resilient to it when they hear it.
But so they listen to this, and then they say, on one hand, these guys are saying it's a great idea. On this hand, they're saying that that's not a great idea. What is it that gets them to? Why do they care?
I think that the reason that they care is just like, if they are the type of show where they do have some standards. If they don't have standards, you're in trouble. But if they have some standards, then you can use those standards as a basis of the conversation. So, for example, if they have a standard that says, no, you're not supposed to have sick and dying animals, or you're not supposed to sell them too young,
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that does it right there.
that standard is easy to use. You feel like an egg is too young, guys, and then they'll be like, okay, I guess you're right. So, um, if they have a standard like sick and dying, wild caught, or maybe probably not wild caught, but sick, too young. Too young goes across all different species for different, and it's different for different species, right? And so that's an easy thing. If someone has that standard, you just point to that standard and say, hey, an egg is too young.
Can you answer True Tutor Tom? Are the egg sellers offering these eggs too soon after they're laid, close to hatching, or anytime during incubation? I don't actually know enough about it because I'd never to buy an egg. I might receive an egg from someone I respect, but
Yeah.
buying an egg would be um, what? How old are these eggs? Are they just ready to hatch? Are they just anytime during the incubation, or do we not? They don't even know.
Well, if they're doing it right, which is already, like, I don't know, that's a big if, but if they're doing it right, they're doing it early. There's going to be a longer wait for it to hatch. They're not selling it right before at the point where the neonate is developing inside of the egg. That's where it's more risky. If they're selling it within a month of it being laid, then that's I think more common. But if they're having trouble selling their eggs and they have held on to them for 6 months and they're still putting them on their table, then yeah, they're selling them too late, and there could be more complications with that.
All right. So yeah, I think that
Probably not, but there could be, theoretically.
So has anyone are the shows I mentioned wild caught in the beginning. I It's my opinion, and I know what at least the lean that you two have, that wild caught should really only be kept by people who are going to breed them, because that's what they're necessary for. But I see it every show I go to. I know that people have wild caughts on their tables because of how many things they have and how old they are. Because who brings an unknown age chameleon that's fully grown and whatever, you'd sell them, at 6 months or whatever, whatever's reasonable.
Yeah.
You don't
I
have them when you go like this looks like it could die at any minute because it's too old, kind of thing. But
I tell people all the time that if there's an adult chameleon for sale, there's a reason. You got to figure out what that reason is. And that's the challenge. I think from an ethical standpoint, there's a lot of unethical sales of older animals, whether that be wild caught or there's an issue with that animal, um, and so that's something that people should be cognizant of as a customer in the market. Be skeptical of adults.
Yeah.
So Tom has another question. There's a guy selling tortoise eggs that are days within hatching. It's been a good model for him. I was skeptical, but he has a good track record and shares his data for every eggs he has sold.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Tortoises are, I don't know who said this, but you can put them at the bottom of a boat and ship them across the ocean on the bottom of the boat without food or water for months at a time, and they still come out. So
Yeah.
they're not
I,
chameleons, and they live
exactly.
the hundreds. They live
Yeah, I'd say
decades and decades, and they're hard to kill, but people
exactly.
have done
Yeah.
it. So yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say with a tortoise, that's the difference. Is no one is concerned about their day old tortoise crashing and dying on them. I mean, I guess it could happen, but they're much hardier from the very beginning. That it's not as much of an ethical concern. Like that thing that I was talking about how people argue that chameleons as a whole are not even well suited for captivity. Like they'll make that broad statement about all species of chameleons. Hatchlings are 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 not going to make that argument better. Like it makes like that and the a day old hatchling out of an egg is definitely not going to help with that argument. So I guess to me, starting with that baseline understanding of working with chameleons, recognizing that you're taking on that challenge, um, means that you also have to take on that challenge from an ethical standpoint in a way that's different from other species. You can't just like because with tortoises, it's probably fine. Like it probably is totally cool and completely ethical. I would have no issue with that. Um, the the problem is that with when I got involved with chameleons, and I know you guys have been a part of setting these standards, but we've known as breeders, you don't send animals out before a certain point in their development. The reason is because they're probably not going to be like people are probably not going to be able to keep them alive. And they can, like it's theoretically possible. I've seen people who succeed with eggs or succeed with hatchlings. I know a handful of people who have succeeded with a hatchling off a CB reptile, like shipped to them as a hatchling. We've all known that that's still a bad thing to do. Like we all know that that's a bad way to be seen it, as a hobby, knowing that like the survival rates of that method are lower. The survival rates in general are lower. Like what we have a responsibility to do is get those survival rates up. And so from an like for me, that's why it's an ethical consideration is that we have a responsibility, whether it be in the way that we keep them ourselves, but also in the way that we transfer them to some other person in the community, whether that be through the education that we give them, through the hardiness of the animal that they're getting. We don't want to send them an animal that's going to be a big challenge for them to keep alive. Um, we want to send them one that's at a point where it's past that point of viability and it's going to be easier for them to keep alive. So that's kind of the way I see it. Is it's different for chameleons because they are not as hardy from the beginning and they're just not as hardy in general.
Agree. I think that's an excellent point. Um, but but yeah, and I guess there's a spectrum. There's the things that are destined to die quick and easy and are very hard to keep and maybe no one's ever kept alive.
Yeah.
And and then there's these things that they're very difficult to get rid of. And that's why people lose them and and leave them out in the wild because they're just tired of caring for them and they don't die, even though they never cared for them for a year or two. Or some people talk about how they have a snake that they left, unfed, unwatered, and for a year and it somehow survived. And they, but that's terrible. But you hear about these stories and you're like, wow, that's
They're hardy.
really, really hardy. And
Yeah,
so
they're different. And I think that whenever anybody tries to make a comparison across species or industries and they don't take that into consideration, they're not really thinking about it very hard. They're just trying to make an excuse. So I mean that's really all it is. They want to sell eggs. So they're trying to justify it. But if you look at it like from an ethical standpoint, it's pretty easy to tell who these people are, right? Who are the ones who are selling eggs? It's not the people who were sending out 3-month olds before this thing happened. It's the people who were sending out hatchlings before this. It's all the people that would be flipping a sick wild caught on their table. Like I'm no offense to who they are, but it's like that's the group making this argument that eggs are better than the sick hatchling or the sick hatchling or wild caught that I used to send out. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it is kind of better for you, but like it's not better for us as an industry and as a community. And so I can recognize the incremental improvement on like the very worst practice compared to egg sales. Like egg sales are not as bad. I guess it's like, I get that. But so for some of the people that were engaged in the very worst ethical activities in the industry, they're loving egg sales, like because they feel better about it. Like and to some degree they should. Like but it's not a good argument to make. Like I like to sell eggs now because I was selling these wild caught that I couldn't keep. Like my inventory was just crashing in value, and now I can keep these eggs forever and sell them for, you know, sell them like hotcakes. Like I get it from a business standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, it's just it's a small incremental improvement. It's not it's not the end game. It's not like the result that we want to see um, in the hobby. And that's what, like, to me, whenever you bring an ethical lens, you're always looking for the best thing. You're looking for the best way to do things and promote that activity. Now it's not about blaming someone who's not doing it. It's about reaching for what's the best, like what's better than what you can possibly do yourself. You use ethics to improve yourself, to improve your current practice. And that's like, and for me, I love that. Like I when someone wants to have that conversation with me about how I can do better, what I can do, but like challenge me, let's go. Like I think that's fun. um but when someone has the reaction of like, uh they want to they're defensive or about something that they've done in the past, I you know it I'm not very sympathetic to that emotion. Like get get on that path to feeling excited about what you could do next and forget about it, right? That to me, that's the attitude that we want to promote. That's the attitude we want to engage with people on. Whenever you bring the ethical lens, that's why. It's like, get excited. It's going to be fun. It's going to be challenging, and you're probably going to fail. Like it's not something, like when you set an ethical standard, it's not something you can achieve sometimes. Like it's something that you strive for, and that's like, I think that's totally fine. That's why we do it. um
Yeah, and that's the only way that we're going to figure out how to reach that sometime in the future.
exactly, somebody's got to try, somebody's got to go for it. So
I mean,
I,
case in point, I've been talking about individually raising panther chameleons for years and years and years. I created a cage just for it. And it wasn't until actually Jonathan came around and said, okay, I'm going to do it, that people were now able to say, oh, wow, someone's actually doing it. It's not just a pie in the sky idea.
yeah,
Someone's doing it. And so once someone breaks that barrier, then other people, it's easier.
exactly.
Kind of like the 4-minute mile. It wasn't believable we could do better, and then someone broke it, and within weeks, more people broke it because people believed. And I guess we need to believe that we can do better, and keep moving in that direction. And
Yeah,
and we could do it in a way that people would say that your heart would explode if you ran a mile under 4 minutes. And that, I mean, people laugh at that today, but that was really believed. I mean, that
yeah,
medicine believed that stuff.
yeah,
And then someone did it, and then within weeks, multiple people did it, and it was just like unbelievable.
yeah.
But
So
with these higher standards, it's when somebody actually does it, then it becomes somebody's actually set the bar.
Yeah,
And now you have pressure to
to go
reach
get it.
for it
Yeah,
or explain why you are not. And that's an uncomfortable conversation for breeders who are supposedly at the pinnacle of husbandry.
yeah. But I don't know, I want people to do better than what I do. Like I want someone to outdo me, and I want to learn from them like that. Why? I don't know. I don't understand the concept. Like I
Well,
get
what
it.
I'm saying is once somebody does it,
Yeah.
then there's pressure for other
Oh yeah.
people.
Yeah, and I mean, you can call it pressure. I'd say it's motivation. It's fun. Get it? Like, get after
Okay.
it. That's So I don't know.
For
I played
people
a
like
lot of
you, it's motivation.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Well,
I played a lot of sports growing up, and I love competition. I love the challenge, right? So if and I know some people when they get they feel threatened and they have all these negative emotions. I get it. I don't relate to it. I hear it and I see their reactions on social media and it's kind of funny, but like I don't relate to it at all. I feel like the positive side of it should be like people who enjoy what they're doing and enjoy the challenge, enjoy striving to do better, and you create a community around that goal. You create a community around that energy of being positive and learning versus the one where you're like, oh, I don't want to change the thing I've been doing for 20 years, like, and trying to dig in at every moment where anybody tries to challenge your way of thinking. um I find that the the fun stuff is not is like kind of ignoring those people and move on, find somebody who gets excited and just keep going, because at some point the community itself, there will be enough people and the standards, to your point, Bill, will be higher, and those people will have a harder choice to make, right?
Yeah,
And
and well, when people see what you are doing, and they want to come, they want to start to breed panther chameleons, and they have a choice of examples that are out there. Now they actually have to make a choice as to whether they're going to step up to the plate or just be mediocre. I will go ahead and use that term
yeah, but
and mean
I
it.
yeah, well, I do think that there's a real thing when it comes to one of the things I like about panthers is there's a visual difference between animals that have been raised properly and animals that have not. And when you do it right, they reward you. And it's visible. You can see it. You can see the difference between a panther that's raised individually and a panther that's raised group in a group. Um, and there's certain things like that where when you make a step change in quality, the expectation changes too in the market, and therefore it forces people to start to be like, oh well, I guess I should do that too, because I'm not gonna be able to sell at 3 months. I'm gonna have to hold to 5 or 6 to match that 3 month
Yep. Yep.
that 3 month look. And that's one of the things I like about the species, because it promotes raising the bar. It promotes that activity because it results in sales. Um, and people know that. so that's the other, but on the flip side, you do see some people, the response is to then just like try to wholesale everything off
Mhm.
because they can't compete at the retail level. um and so there's a little bit of that type of adjustment that some people will make. Instead of trying to reach for the retail value, they'll they'll just start doing wholesale, um, as as one remedy versus trying to compete at the retail level. But I do like that about the species. Like, people like to hate on panthers, but that's one thing that's pretty cool about them,
Yeah.
is that they look better when you do it right.
All right. So we're approaching a little more than an hour, so we're gonna wrap this show up. But I think this is true. I think this is Steph. Oh, actually, should
Yeah.
put it on there. Oops, I'm bumping through things because they're popping up. Um, well said, John. And I think I think that's very important. So, and this was a great episode, so interesting and informative. What I got is money, people, and hobby sellers. So, so that's so go to the hobby seller, I guess. But I think you can still. I think as we raise the bar, you can still make money doing this. But you just have to follow, and or at least or lead and do what needs to be done. Bill, any final thoughts for tonight?
Well, I think we had a pretty good conversation here.
Mhm.
And I think what's really great is we are hearing more and more of these discussions on podcasts and video podcasts around And this is a sign of the times. I really like what I'm seeing with more and more podcasts coming up, and video podcasts, and the interview type like this, because this is where our community actually starts to grow, because we bring on people, and the community can watch this. And so just the fact that this topic is being discussed on more and more of these shows is definitely a positive direction.
Jonathan, anything you want? You've said a lot, but anything you'd like to finish with?
Well, I appreciate you guys including me in this conversation. I mean, it's something that I'm pretty passionate about. It's obvious from the beginning that it was something that I was interested in. But I would also say that, like, I'm not perfect. I'm not. You guys know that. Most of my customers know that. I'm not perfect. And no one is. So when we start talking about ethics, it's not about perfection. It's about striving for it.
Yeah, I agree.
It's it's about, hey, if you aren't, then what are you going to do about it? Right? How are you going to improve? And those and so for me, one of the things that does make me a little bit uncomfortable about the conversation is people using me as an example. I'm not the example. I think that the thing that we work on together is the example, and we can all get better somehow. We can all learn something, and so the reason I like this topic is because of that. It should take the focus off of the individual and start to put the focus on our goals as a community, or our goals as breeders, as a group of people trying to learn and grow. And that to me is what gets me excited about this topic, is that we have a something to focus on, something to work on together.
Okay. Well, you can be uncomfortable about it, but you were the one who actually took a hammer to the ceiling. So you're going to have to live up to that. Yeah, you're not perfect, but you literally were the one who said, yeah, this is going to happen at a retail level.
And you named yourself iPardalis for a reason. So,
and the thing is, maybe it's I can say this doesn't mean that Jonathan Hill is the end all be all. For everything, there's got to be someone who takes that one step. And it's just a step. It's just a decision where you don't know how it's going to be. It's not because you say I'm so much better than everybody else. You just say, I'm going to do this because I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
And just so for everybody else,
sure.
You say, okay, this is what I think is an ethical way to go forward. I want to be a small batch breeder. I want to have maximum 2 to 3 pairs, and that is going to be my breeding. And I'm going to treat them like kings, like pets, like well kept pets, and I'm going to purposely keep it small so I can offer this. Just make that decision. It's not a huge commitment to a totally different life. It's just saying I'm going to take that step. I won't even say the courage to take that step. It doesn't take any courage. It's just, hey, I think this is pretty cool. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And then people see that, and all of a sudden you start seeing currents go in that direction. If it's cool, if it works.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So I can't top that off with anything new or exciting or interesting. I think this has all been a great conversation. And next week is the grand reopening, the grand launch. I don't know. We should probably get a better name for it. I'll have to think about it over the week. But join us again next week. And I don't even know what the topic's going to be. I may just bring on a hodgepodge of different people from the past and see who's available. But I've got a reptile show to go to Sunday this week, so maybe I'll meet somebody there. But I thank everyone for being here, and I don't know why I'm yelling, but I am. So I'm going to stop and stop right there and thank everyone for being here tonight. And thank you, Jonathan, for being here. Bill, as always, it's great to co-host with you. Have a good night.